In August of 2015, a woman was home alone when she received a very disturbing text message from her daughter, who lived in Houston, Texas. It read that she was being held hostage by a former boyfriend. Time truly was of the essence, but the response of the sheriff's department would lead to a plethora of questions and criticisms. It was around 10:15 a.m. on the 8th of August 2015 when Barbara Yansky received a text message from her 40-year-old daughter, Valerie Jackson. It simply read, 911, 911, 911. 4 minutes later, Barbara received another text message from Valerie which read, "He has the phone and will ring. DVD has gun." Barbara took this message to mean that Valerie was being held at gunpoint at her home by her ex-boyfriend, 48-year-old David Conley. Valerie's mother, Barbara, lived in another state, but as soon as she received that text message, she immediately called the police and requested them to conduct a welfare check on Valerie and her family. The Jackson family consisted of 50-year-old Dwayne Jackson and his 40-year-old wife, Valerie, and their children, 10-year-old Honesty, 10-year-old Dwayne, 11-year-old Caleb, 7-year-old Trinity, and 6-year-old Jonah. Valerie's 13-year-old son, Nathaniel, from a prior relationship, also lived at the home. At 10:49 a.m., the Harris County Sheriff's Office responded to Valerie's home on Falling Oaks Road in Houston. They approached the front door and knocked. Nobody answered. They alerted to their presence, but once again, nobody came to the front door. They could hear somebody inside turn a lock on the front door. They stood on the porch for several minutes, but nothing appeared to be amiss. They contacted Valerie's mother and asked what kind of car Conley drove. She described the car, and they informed her that it wasn't there. After hanging up with Valerie's mother, the officers left the home. At 11:57 a.m., Valerie texted her mother once more. It was spelled incorrectly, but she was able to determine that the text message read, "They knocked, left." 15 minutes later, Barbara was informed by the sheriff's office that they had gone to Valerie's home, but nobody responded. They did not have probable cause to enter. Barbara called up Valerie's ex-boyfriend, Conley. He said that he was across town and that he had no idea where Valerie was. The officers responded to the scene again at 4:43 p.m., followed by another visit at 6:10 p.m., and then once more at 7:51 p.m. These welfare checks were triggered by Valerie's mother calling 911 again, followed by Valerie's brother, Arlie Yansky, who was in Montana, and Valerie's sister, who was in Chicago. Valerie had been sending out numerous messages for help. Sometime later, officers learned that Conley had an arrest warrant for allegations that he had smashed Valerie's head against a refrigerator back in July. It quickly dawned on them just how serious this situation might have been. They returned to the Jackson family home and set up a perimeter around the house. They then called the Sheriff's Office High-Risk Operations Unit, which is similar to a SWAT team. As they waited for them to arrive, the officers who had set up the perimeter peered into the windows to see if they could see any movement from inside the home. It was now dark, and they were armed with their flashlights. As Deputy William Reed illuminated one of the rooms with his flashlight, he saw a comforter wrapped up on a bed. He saw a child's head with a gunshot wound. Blood pooled on the bed. "I could see a child's head. Now we have a life in danger. We have to go into the house." Time was truly of the essence, and the officers didn't have enough time to wait for the Sheriff's Office High-Risk Operations Unit. Officers approached the front door and began to kick it in, fearing what they could find inside. As soon as the door blasted open, the distinct sound of gunfire erupted from inside the home. The officers retreated from the house and waited for the arrival of the unit and a negotiator. They arrived at the scene within minutes, set up a perimeter, and began negotiations. They had established that Conley was inside the home and that he was armed. A standoff ensued, lasting almost 2 hours. During these 2 hours, Conley was called by Valerie's brother. He asked him what was going on and where Valerie and the children were. Conley chillingly replied that he had killed them all. Eventually, Conley came outside and surrendered. With Conley in handcuffs, the officers conducted a sweep of Valerie's home. What they found inside would traumatize even the most seasoned investigators. As they entered the first bedroom, They immediately noticed that blood was splattered across the walls. The bodies of 4 of the children were found inside this bedroom. Their wrists were all handcuffed to the bed frame of their bunk beds, and they had all been shot dead. They proceeded through the rest of the home. In the bathroom, they found the bodies of the other 2 children. Blood was splashed across the white walls and bathtub. Inside the master bedroom, investigators found the lifeless body of Valerie. She was lying in a contorted position on the bed, her wrists handcuffed to the footboard, and she had been shot a total of 6 times. It was observed that there was blood on the bottom of her foot, indicating that Valerie had maybe been forced to watch her children be killed before she was forced into the bedroom, where she too lost her life. Dwayne's body was also found in the master bedroom. He was on the floor, his body covered by a blanket. His ankles were handcuffed, and he had been shot a total of 14 times. On the kitchen table, investigators found a 9mm handgun along with an ammo box of 50 bullets. Throughout the home, they found 34 shell casings, along with handcuff keys and 4 rolls of duct tape. It was evident that this was a premeditated murder and that Conley had come to the home equipped with these ominous items, knowing full well that nobody would be leaving the home alive. Neighbors gathered outside to try and figure out what was taking place. The home was quickly cordoned off with crime scene tape as forensic experts were called in. There was nothing that could be done for the family. They were all pronounced dead at the scene. Neighbors watched in horror as 8 bodies were removed from the home in body bags. Valerie and David Conley met back in 1999 through a phone dating service. Conley had just finished serving time in prison for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. When Valerie entered into a relationship with Conley, she was unaware of his violent nature. Conley's first wife, Vanessa Conley, recounted to MyFox Houston, "He was very charming, nice at the time. He was so nice, called me every day." However, around a month into their marriage, Conley completely changed. Vanessa said that one day she didn't do the laundry appropriately and didn't clean to Conley's standard. He responded by shoving her into the bathtub and beating her. The relationship between Valerie and Conley was very much the same. Around a year into the relationship, Conley and Valerie had their first child together, a daughter they named Natalie. Shortly after she was born, Conley was arrested and charged with domestic violence after he shoved Vanessa onto a bed, straddled her, and held a knife to her throat. Conley shouted that he wasn't going to go back to prison because of Valerie. This attack had come after Valerie had filed an assault charge against him for cutting her with a knife, punching her in the face, and wrapping a cord around Natalie's neck. Valerie later recanted, but the prosecutor pursued the case anyway. In 2002, Conley was sentenced to 5 years in prison for retaliation. Upon his release, Conley and Valerie continued their relationship. By now, Natalie had been sent to live with her grandmother out of state. Barbara would become Natalie's legal guardian, but the couple had another child, a little boy they named Nathaniel. He was among the victims found dead inside the home. In 2008, Valerie filed a protection order against Conley after he threatened to break her legs, refused to let her leave their apartment, and then pushed her at a bus stop. She testified, "He was making accusations against me, telling me what I can wear, threatening to break my legs and put me in a wheelchair. He was making accusations saying that I was contacting my husband and saying that we were going to get back together." Conley pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct, but in 2012, Valerie requested that the protection order be dismissed, telling the court that she wanted to reconcile with Conley. Just the following year, Conley was charged with aggravated assault for threatening Valerie with a knife. The month before Valerie and her family were killed, Conley had pushed her head against a refrigerator multiple times after she attempted to stop him from disciplining her son with a belt. The case was still pending when he broke into the home and killed them all. Valerie was also in an on-and-off relationship with Dwayne Jackson, a longtime family friend. She went back and forth between the 2 men. Conley stated of the relationship, "I never tried to hold her back, but then she would always try and run off to be with him." Eventually, Valerie and Dwayne were married. They went on to have 5 children together. Unfortunately, the relationship between Dwayne and Valerie wasn't much better, and Valerie found herself a victim to another violent man. In May of 2006, a neighbor reported Dwayne assaulting Valerie on their balcony. When police arrived, Dwayne said they were just arguing. Valerie said that Dwayne hadn't hit her but that she was afraid of him. In 2009, Valerie accused Dwayne of punching her and accusing her of having an affair. Then, in 2012, Dwayne was charged with holding Valerie and their children against their will for several days at a motel in Houston. When Valerie attempted to leave, Dwayne hit her in the face several times. He also threatened to set the house on fire or shoot up the house if she left. The relationship between Valerie and Dwayne eventually broke down, and Valerie found her way back to Conley. She dedicated her love to her former husband by getting his name tattooed. As if history was repeating itself once more, Conley wasn't a changed man at all. The abuse only continued. For years, Valerie had been bouncing from one violent man to another, and the relationships often overlapped. When Valerie went back to Conley for one final time, Dwayne posted on Facebook, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Don't this make the fourth or fifth time of you two getting back together?" All while this abuse was going on, the family was being investigated by Child Protective Services. There had been various reports dating back to 2011. Reasonable efforts had been made in the past to prevent the state from taking the children into care. There had been 4 separate completed investigations into the children's welfare. In December of 2011, CPS received a report of possible physical abuse of Caleb, Trinity, and Jonah. The case was ruled out with no significant factors found. In October of 2012, CPS received a report of possible physical abuse of Nathaniel, Dwayne, Jonah, Caleb, and Trinity. The case was ruled unable to be determined. That same month, the agency was contacted again about possible neglectful supervision with the same 5 children. In July of 2013, CPS received a report of possible neglectful supervision of Caleb, but neglect was ruled out by the agency. Back when Dwayne held Valerie and the children hostage at the motel, the agency was notified. CPS took depositions on that complaint, as well as complaints that Valerie would leave the children home alone multiple times. However, the agency caseworkers found that they were unable to determine the validity of these complaints and referred the family to family-based safety services in January of 2013. This division tries to help families in trouble, gets them to sign agreements to keep children safe, and submits them to any future monitoring by the agency. The family, which included both Conley and Dwayne, appeared to be amenable to working with the agency. Just 3 months later, Valerie contacted her CPS caseworker and informed her that she had called the police on Conley following the attack in which he cut her with a knife. 3 of the children in the family were reported by CPS to have what they described as special needs. Jonah had been diagnosed with a mild form of autism. Nathaniel had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, and Caleb had suffered brain damage, which resulted in him being developmentally delayed. In September of 2013, Child Protective Services finally took the children away from Valerie, Dwayne, and Conley. They took temporary custody of the children after an investigation revealed a pattern of physical abuse and neglectful supervision. They intervened after 7-year-old Caleb, who had developmental disabilities, had walked out of the home on 2 different occasions. On one occasion, he was found at 8:30 p.m. wandering near a busy intersection. In the affidavit petitioning a Houston court for the removal of the children, an agency caseworker had written, "The department believes the children are in immediate danger." The following month, Valerie was able to get custody back of her children when the suit was dismissed. After Valerie got the children back, she and Conley were ordered to participate in counseling and random drug testing. That part of the case was dismissed in March of 2014 after they completed all court-ordered services. The agency continued to conduct periodic visits and interviews with the children, but the case was then closed in May of 2014. Shortly before the murders, Valerie had called it quits on the relationship with Conley. The final straw came when Conley attacked Valerie after she tried to stop him from flogging Nathaniel with a belt. Valerie moved out of the home and into a local motel. Shortly thereafter, Conley moved back into the home with Valerie and the children. The couple changed the locks. As these details came out in the media, the judge allowed the children to move back in with Valerie after they were removed from her care in 2013. Defending his decision, Juvenile Court Judge Glenn Devlin said that he was never told that the children were in any immediate physical danger. He said that neither he nor CPS could have prevented the massacre based on the case presented to them in court. Details of the domestic abuse and domestic violence were reported in the media, and many people blamed Valerie for not doing more to protect her children. Unfortunately, when a woman tries to leave a violent man, that's when she faces the greatest danger. Her story was an extreme case of domestic violence entrapment because she had yo-yoed back and forth between two violent men. Following Conley's arrest, he made a full and detailed confession to the brutal murders in an interview with two homicide detectives. He said that one morning, he had driven over to Valerie's home. By this point, he and Valerie had broken up, and Dwayne had moved back into the home. However, Conley believed that he should still be allowed to stay at the home in one of the rooms, as he claimed he still paid rent. Conley drove over to the home and discovered that the locks had been changed and found that Dwayne was now living in the home. An intense rage built up inside of Conley. He left the home and began to plot. He later returned to the home and entered through an unlocked window. He was carrying a bag containing 6 pairs of handcuffs, an handgun, duct tape, and 3 magazines of ammunition. Conley first handcuffed Dwayne on the floor in the master bedroom. He brought all of the children and Valerie into the bedroom. They watched in horror as Conley shot Dwayne dead. He then handcuffed Valerie to the bed as the children ran into the bathroom and cowered in the small room. Conley followed them closely behind. He shot 2 of the children dead and handcuffed the rest of the petrified children to their bunk beds. Conley then shot Nathaniel, his own son. He commented, "I shot him because he was disrespectful, and he was growing up to be just like Dwayne Jackson." Nathaniel had asked his father if he could be shot in the head, knowing that this would be the quickest method of murder. Conley said that he obliged. Conley had been inside the family's home for 14 hours, systematically killing the family. During those 14 hours, he completely terrorized the family, essentially forcing them to watch as each person was killed, knowing that they were going to be next. He revealed the following. The girls, Honesty and Trinity, were still alive up until the moment the door was kicked in by the responding officers. He said that he had planned on killing himself after killing the 3 final victims, but ultimately decided to surrender instead. For hours, Valerie, Honesty, and Trinity were handcuffed and surrounded by the lifeless bodies of the other children. After making the confession, Conley permitted an interview from behind bars with CBS 11 KHOU. Despite having just murdered people, including his own son, he came across as calm, and reporter even described him as poised and polite. He repeatedly said, "I'm only human." He said that when he discovered that Dwayne had moved back in with Valerie, he was in shock and felt fed up. He added that Nathaniel was a problem child, describing his deceased son as disrespectful and saying that Valerie wouldn't let him discipline him. He chillingly commented, "Thou shalt honor your mother and father, or your days are short." Conley then spoke with other news outlets, claiming that he loved his son but believed the children were all growing up to be monsters. He shared his belief that the children were not being raised properly and were acting unkindly toward others. He said to KPRC TV, "They were growing up to be monsters. They were disrespectful and rude in school. I'm not saying they're dead because of that. I'm not even saying I killed them. God says in the Bible, 'Do not disrespect your mother or father or your days will be short,' but I'm not saying that's what happened." He then accused Valerie of feeding the children spoiled food and lamented that she refused to let him punish them. He questioned whether Nathaniel was actually his son, stating that he wanted a paternity test, but Valerie had never allowed it. Conley went on to speak about his checkered past, claiming that previous charges of domestic violence against him were all lies, and referred to Dwayne as a monster who had harassed him. This was an ironic statement given that Conley stood accused and admitted to killing Valerie, her entire family, including his own son. Based on his own statements, it was clear that Conley feared the disrespect of his own children and responded to perceived disrespect with abuse and murder. As the investigation was underway, questions were raised regarding how the Harris County Sheriff's Office responded to the text message Valerie had sent her mother, making it clear that she was being held hostage at gunpoint at her home. The Harris County Sheriff's Office had arrived at the home quite early, and Conley had admitted to being in the home for 14 hours. Many people wondered whether the family could have been saved if they had broken down the front door the first time they visited the home. The question remained as to whether the department had been given accurate information from the 911 dispatcher, and if so, why they didn't respond to the call appropriately for a possible armed intruder. Obviously, to gain entry to a home, law enforcement needs a search warrant from a magistrate to show they have probable cause to believe a crime has occurred or is occurring inside the home. However, in certain circumstances, they are relieved of this duty to get a warrant. Someone being held hostage at gunpoint would have fallen under those certain circumstances. It would be discovered that Valerie and the children were still alive inside the home when officers first responded. After the officers left, Valerie had desperately sought out help. By October 2021, it was announced that the prosecution was not seeking the death penalty against Conley. Following Conley's arrest, he had been undergoing psychological testing. This testing found that he had an intellectual disability, and as per Supreme Court rulings, those with intellectual disabilities could not be executed. The trial began on the 5th of October. There wasn't going to be any debate as to whether Conley had killed the family or not. He made a full confession after all. During opening statements, the prosecutor presented the theory that Conley had been motivated to carry out the gruesome murders simply because he wanted to emotionally torture Valerie. The prosecutor detailed how Conley had methodically walked through the house and killed all 6 victims, finally ending with David Conley shooting and killing Valerie Jackson, putting an end to what was imagined as the most terrifying and horrific last hours of her life. Conley's full confession was played for the jury, ultimately sealing his fate. After deliberating for just around 1 hour, the jury returned with the verdict and found David Conley guilty of the murders of Valerie and Dwayne. He had been charged with the murders of the children as well, but it was decided that he would not be tried for their murders. David Conley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. That's all in this file. Please be sure now to watch another video and of course press on screen to subscribe to my channel now because you wouldn't want to miss what's next, and I'll see you next time.